Hey, welcome to Lead Full. My name is Chesley Lunday. I am your host today. Here's the deal. We know that life, no matter how successful you are, can sometimes be an exercise in futility. And we want to help you defeat futility in your lives. We want to help you develop fulfillment, and we want to help you change the world, because we know this: when leaders are fulfilled, they fill the world with hope. Now, let's get ready to Lead Full. Hey, today we are interviewing Matt Dunsmoor. He is the CEO of Octopy. You can check out his website at octopy.io. Matt is on the speaking team and the consultant team for Simon Sinek. You might have heard him, Leaders Eat Last. You should start with why. Great guy. And Matt's been on their speaking team for a while, but before that, he was at Zappos and was part of the Holocracy team that did that whole new way to do work without managers and stuff. That's not quite what it was. We'll talk about that in the interview. Be ready, because this is going to be enjoyable. Welcome to the show, Lead Full. How you doing?
Thanks for having me. I'm great. It's good to be here. Good to reconnect after so many years. So I don't know if I assume you're going to tell the story of
probably because you don't even remember it. So
oh man,
you left a big impact on my life.
For at least a little while, yeah, for sure.
So for those of you that don't know, Matt and I used to go to high school together. I was only living in Pueblo for 7 months in between my parents' jobs. And so playing basketball on the same team, and we were in practice one day, and he was posting up on me, and I was playing defense, and his elbow caught my teeth, and I lost a tooth because of it. And so again, great impact on my life, but
you're making, I'm like rubbing my tongue on my teeth just thinking about back to that. And the funny thing is, so I mentioned this to you when we first chatted, I recognized the name and I was like, I know this person, but it had been so long. And then I Facebook stalked you lightly and was like, well, it says he's from Oklahoma and now he lives in Arizona. So maybe it's just a name that's similar to someone who I knew. And you don't look the same as you did back when you were a sophomore in high school.
I gained 70 pounds. But yeah, right. I think it was 140. Yeah, 140 when I was playing basketball then. Yeah, not the same anymore.
Yeah, to have that metabolism again.
Right, right.
But I still feel very bad. When you told me that, I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that happened.
I think it's a joke. So, I mean, it's hilarious. But no.
I'm glad you can laugh about it.
Yes, I can. Yeah. So Matt, you, the reason why I wanted to hook up with you, you've worked at Zappos, and you have worked with Simon Sinek's team, and so you deal with what it looks like to be a young professional out in the marketplace, kicking butt, taking names, and our audience is a lot of that. They're in a lot of leadership positions and are trying to figure out how to make the world a better place, at the same time trying to get personal fulfillment. And so I would love to start, tell us your story. How'd you get in the field where you're at today? And how did you meet up with Simon? I would love to hear that.
Yeah. Well, thanks. Yeah. It's always interesting because I don't think, and for most of the people that I've talked to, it's a similar story. Once you get to, your 20s, 30s, it's often by accident is how you end up wherever you're at. And for me, it was no exception. I graduated from college, and I was very high on myself when I came out of college, and I was like, I've got 2 degrees, and no one wanted to hire me. And that was a bit of a shot to the ego. And I thought I was above a lot of jobs at that time. And, after 4 months of moving back into your parents' basement, after you think you're the king of the world, you get a bit of a check. And so I had a friend who happened to work at Zappos. He and his brother both had gotten jobs there, and they just raved about it. And he asked me if I would help him move out there. And I helped him move his stuff, and he just said, come take the tour. Right. I just kind of a behind the scenes, nothing official. And so he got me in, and it was kind of after hours, and he walked me through, and just the vibe that was there. I was like, this is really cool. And he talked about that, most people start on phones and you get promoted from there. And that was really appealing to me because I was like, I always hated, and probably I would guess some of the people that are listening as you describe them would feel the same way. I was always one of those people who I felt like I got promoted fairly quickly whenever I was at a place. But then I would get really frustrated when I felt like I was in line for something bigger, and then someone would get hired from the outside and they were like, oh, well, this person has experience, so we're bringing them in, even though I knew the business or the team or the company better, right? And so it just really felt like an alignment of values there, and I liked that about them. And I was always one of the people who was raised to not do a lot of career hopping. That was something that was discouraged, and I think now it's less viewed that way, and there's certainly merit to that. But I was definitely, like in my family, it was when you start somewhere, you want to continue there as long as possible, right? That's a good sign. So I liked that a company actually reflected that back to me for once, and it showed a real investment. So I said, you know what? I'm going to do it. Vegas is a fun place to live in your early 20s. Why not? And so I did that. Was working there, worked my way up there, and by the end of it, I was working in software product management. But along the way, I had kind of stumbled into this idea of company culture and the impact that it could have. Part of what pulled me there was the culture they had, and how it appealed to just focusing on the individuals who worked there. And I felt that, I'd never been in a place like that. And so I joined a bunch of the culture initiatives, some inward-facing things, and I started working on the Holocracy team when we were making a transition over to self-management, self-organization. And so I was more excited about that than the job that was paying my bills at the time, right? And so I was doing that kind of as a side gig inside the company, but I was primarily getting paid to do other stuff. I think I was working in content and on the social media team, and then eventually I was a product manager in software. And it just so happened that while I was on that team, Simon's team came in. So Simon and Tony, the former CEO, they were good friends. And Simon had just offered, hey, my team does these things called Y Discovery workshops. Do you think it would be of use if they came in and did it for, some people in your organization? And luckily, I was leading enough teams at that time that I qualified to be invited to the workshop. And I just kind of was like, well, if I'm going to be expected to manage myself, I should probably understand myself a little bit better. So yeah, let's take a look at this, because I was in the habit, and I think maybe you probably know how this goes, but you just say yes to a lot of things, right? You're a person who has a lot of, they're handing a lot of different pies, right? Always doing something, always staying busy. And it was the same as Zappos. I would say yes to almost everything because it was like, ooh, that could be fun, or ooh, this will like be a good career move, or I can contribute here. And there was just always reasons for me to say yes. So I was stretching myself thin, but I didn't have a good filter for what was going to be that thing to keep me from overextending. And so I went through this workshop and was like, oh my gosh, I needed this clarity to understand what makes me tick. And through that, a group of 8 of us kind of met with them the next day to say, can you teach us how to do this so we can do it for each other? When people come through training, we want to give them this experience. And they said, well, we don't have a product for that, but if you help us kind of build it, then sure. So we helped them kind of co-build this and test out this train the trainer model that they hadn't done at the time. And over the course of that work, I really was like, this feels more right to me than what I'm doing. Like, I loved the software I was building. I loved the team that I was on, but I wasn't thrilled about the idea of selling stuff to people. Retail was never really my bag. It was always about the people in the background. So just at the end of certification, they were going on to get certified. They had to observe us delivering the workshop, and then we stayed after for a debrief. And they had a lot of feedback for me and my co-facilitator. So we ended up
you weren't
saying,
a pro right out of the gate? No.
I know, right? I thought I was a pro for sure. Once again, humbling moments just keep piling up. But yeah, the crew kind of said, we got done, and I actually said, well, I had to cancel my plans because I went over today. Anybody want to go grab dinner? And they were the two from Simon's team were like, yeah, sure, we'll do it. And during the course of dinner, they said, don't feel the pressure. We're not trying to steal you or anything, but if you ever decide to leave Zappos, let us know, because we think this is something actually you might be doing. And it was just one of those stars aligning moments where there was enough stuff happening in the background plus this that I was like, if I don't say yes, I'm going to regret this the rest of my life. And like, how often do you get the opportunity to not only go after something that you really want and work for someone who you respect, but be asked to do that? And so I was like, yeah, I got to do it. So So I did that, and I took the leap, and I said, "How's January sound?" Which they weren't ready for, I'm sure, because it was like October, and they were like, "Oh, okay, well, we'll see what we can do." And so that's kind of when it kicked off, and I started at the same time while I was working with their team, kind of doing my own thing, and that was when I created Salt and Pepper 30s, which is exactly what you're talking about with young professionals, because that was my passion, was at that time trying to help people who were in a similar boat of really progressing fast and always feeling like you're the youngest person in the room. No one necessarily wants to listen. Oh, you have to earn your stripes, like all of those things I kept hearing. And so I wanted to help people who were in a similar position in their career, which ultimately then led me to where I am now in Octopy and all those things. But that's the gist of how I got connected with Simon and the team.
That's amazing. So I want to back up a little bit at your time at Zappos. So in 2014, there was a huge initiative that hit all over the country from a media perspective that was about Zappos is changing their company culture. They're not going to have managers anymore, and that's what the Holocracy movement was, right? If I remember correctly. I remember reading that, and you were saying you're actually on the team. Would you explain to the listeners what that was and what you guys were doing?
Yeah, so if you've never read this book, I highly encourage you to check it out. It's called Reinventing Organizations. It's by a guy by the name of Frederick Laloux. Really interesting that really kind of looks at the types of organizations and how we wield power within them and also create structures. And we were on the mission or on the journey as an organization to go what they would call teal, which is kind of this end state. There is no organization on the planet that is fully teal, but it's kind of like all these different elements that add up to create that. And it has to do with sustainability and autonomy. And then part of it was self-management, and self-management really at its core, and especially Holocracy is the example. Holocracy you can think about as an off-the-shelf way of self-managing. It's just kind of a format. And so we used that because it was one of the only real options that gave us like an instruction manual of how to do it. And we were the largest company to ever try self-management at over 1,000. I think at that time we were 1,200. And so really the only difference is, it wasn't what they talked about. I think they sold it as we're getting rid of managers. There is no more hierarchy. And realistically, we are a species that actually thrives on hierarchy. Not to say we like to only be led or whatever, but it feels good for us to be able to maneuver within the hierarchy, right? It's very rewarding. And so it's basically taking the idea of a hierarchy of people, like we have in most organizations, of you report to this person who reports to this person, and turning it into a hierarchy of work. So rather than I am at a level below this person, it's I might fill a role that reports to another role, but I as an individual am at the same actual level as the other person who's filling that, because in another context, I might fill another role where I'm the person who is in the role that is above another role, right? And so that to me really appealed. And then also what it allows you to do in these types of structures is have a say in how the work looks. A lot of organizations will define the position before you get into it, and you don't really have a say. And in Holocracy specifically, what you can do is every, could be a couple of weeks, could be month, however long, but you have governance meetings where you actually can reform the work to make sure that it's actually doing the thing it needs to be doing. So if you're like, I've been assigned this task and it doesn't actually fit within my role, you have a space to say that. And the litmus test is, if it doesn't align with your role's purpose, absolutely it shouldn't be there, right? We can create another, doesn't mean we get rid of that work, but we can create another role for it and someone else can fill it. So it was just a really good way of empowering people and also removing kind of you never fully get away from politics at work, unfortunately, because we're human beings, but it was a good way of making sure that people kind of felt that level playing field and had a say.
So the pushback on that sort of government, if you will, that structure, is that you can't control anything. So you can't control the output of the people. And obviously, I think millennials are like, hey, that's okay. I want to work hard. But boomers are like, yeah, I don't know. What was the biggest challenges that you guys had in implementing that sort of structure?
Yeah. I mean, I think you nailed part of it right there, is that there is this mentality in many organizations. I don't care how modern or progressive your organization is, our tendency, just as human beings, biologically, we're wired to be more skeptical than we are optimistic. It's just the way that we're grown. So a lot of people, there is a lack of trust. They operate from a lack of trust. And what you're pointing to is a big piece of that. And when you have come from the mindset of expecting people to try and get away with stuff, or if we don't tell them what to do, they won't do it, or it's going to be done in a way that isn't effective or efficient. What happens is that mindset gets ingrained because we build policies and practices around it. And so it was a reinforced mindset that most people didn't even know they had, that we had to shift. So shifting the mindset behind it was probably the biggest thing. And then there was this other piece that was not accounted for at the beginning. And I don't think anyone's done it well, which is part of why the why discovery process to me resonated, was because progression goes out the window. If you're in an organization where the role that you were hired for and the very clear path that you had from, let's say you were a designer, come in as an intern, that you can go to designer, designer 2, senior designer, director, VP, C level, right? That's typically like the trajectory. And suddenly, let's say you've worked all the way up to a senior designer and you're on track to become a director, and they come in and they say, oh, we're shaking it up. Now there is no constant when it comes to the organizational structure. We have no specific roles, and the roles that you may spin up now could be entirely different in a year. People who have worked really hard to get to where they're at suddenly are displaced, and they don't know where they can go now. And so progression and a sense of identity, we tie a lot of our identity to that. And I think that really threw off the momentum as well, because you had people who very much considered part of their identity as a manager. Whether or not that was a positive thing, they saw themselves as that, right? Because it wasn't just about management, it was about leading. And suddenly they were being told like, oh, management in itself is not a job. You have to have actually like work-based outputs that will map to get your pay. And it set a lot of people back, and a lot of good people left, a lot of good people lost motivation, and there was a lot of fear. So I think just not knowing that piece or the extent of that piece's impact really set us back as well.
Yeah, so you guys were implementing change in an organization that was already pretty progressive. And so, some of our leaders are in organizations that are not progressive at all. And so they have the old hierarchy, the old structure, legacy structure is what I like to call it. When you are dealing with that massive of a shift, and it's a large company, it's over 1,200 people, what were the processes of change management that you guys were like really, really good at? And then tell me like where you guys could have improved.
Oh, great question. I think the really good at piece was caring for each other along the way. Because we started with a people-focused culture, that was one thing that was really going for us in the transition, because anytime you go into some uncertain situation like that, whether or not it's transitioning your entire operating system, like switching over to a Holocracy or anything like that, or maybe switching product lines, or even the way we work, right? So right now is a perfect example. Over the past 12 months, even if your company's products and services haven't been affected necessarily by COVID, probably the way you work and bringing those to life absolutely has. And so there are probably people out there who had worked all the way up to, maybe they were the one who hired you and you had just started 3 months before COVID hit. Well, guess what? Now you had to switch over to a digital program or a digital platform. And suddenly the people who were junior, they're like, well, I'm really at home on this platform because I use it for whatever, right? Or I've used Slack or Zoom or any of these kinds of conference platforms. And so you're the one who's now training the person who hired and onboarded you. And they all of a sudden feel really displaced. So you have to have that level of trust and humanity and care for each other so that you don't show up from a place of, now you're on the other end. But instead you're showing up from a place of like, we're all in this together, we're going to do it. And I think we had a pretty good spirit of that. One of the things that I think was not really well done, it was oversold a bit, I guess I'll say. In that, they talked about there will be no managers. Well, there's still people who need to oversee and make sure that the vision is being held. Doesn't mean you get to micromanage, right? The title manager changes and some of the expectations of it change as well. But the work of taking care of your team members and making sure we're getting done what we need to do is always going to be there. No matter how self-motivated each of us are, at least having someone to kind of bring us all together and focus us on the vision. So I think that was one of the things that worked against us, was that it was pitched as we're flattening the organization, there will be no more managers. And in reality, it wasn't a flattening of the organization, it was flattening of the people, but the organization still had a hierarchy, and that was okay. And it was almost demonized these ideas of managers and hierarchy when it didn't need to be, you know, and some of those things are really helpful if they're done in a healthy way. And that was the kind of big takeaway that myself and a lot of those members who, like, we joined on the Holocracy team after it was already in motion. One of the things we really pushed for was like, stop worrying about the word and start worrying about how you're showing up as we're doing it. And that was something we had to undo, that the original team, I think, came in and they came from a good place. They were trying to get us excited about it, but ended up kind of setting us up for, well, maybe just setting us up behind the 8 ball.
Right. So there are a couple of people that work really well with a blank sheet of paper and just, here's the mission and here's what you need to accomplish, go do it. And then there are others that need a roadmap. And did you find in that process that the people that needed a roadmap actually needed to leave? Did it favor one sort of working style over another?
It was so fascinating because sometimes it did, sometimes it didn't. The funny thing is, one of the guys that's on my team now, and I worked with him at Zappos as well, his name's Paul Walker, and he self-describes as he loves to be a henchman. And that's basically what you're mentioning of, like, you know, give me the thing that you need done and I'll carry it out. I'm the best at that, but like, don't make me, you know, do the entrepreneurial stuff.
Yeah.
And there's a place for both, which is cool.
Right.
What I found, because I did some Holocracy consulting after I left Zappos with other organizations, and one of those was the city or the state of Washington's tech department. So WaTech decided to do an experiment, and I was one of the people who got to help kind of train and onboard this, and it was very scientifically done. There was a control group, and there was an actual, you know, all that stuff. And what I found was that people who loved that piece, like the process and that, gravitated toward, like, they were the best at learning the rules. Right, because if you're going to have a system like that where it's so wide open, there is the opportunity for chaos.
Right.
So you have to have really strong edges of the sandbox and be very clear about, like, this is what is on limits and this is what's off limits. And Holocracy is kind of known as having a really big rule book. They actually call it the Constitution, like the Holocracy Constitution, and it's massive. And they gravitated towards, you know, they were the best ones at the roles that were about process, about making sure you could do this. Like, they knew the rules inside and out better than anyone else. And then you had those kind of entrepreneurial people who then really were just like, well, what if we did this? What if we did this? And then they had the chance to kind of throw darts at the wall and see what stuck. So there was pieces for both. What I found interesting was that you need both, because you need the starters of the idea, but you also need the maintainers. Yeah. And the starters, and I throw myself in that box as well. Like, right? Yeah. Like, really inspired at the beginning, but the actual maintenance of the thing, not my jam.
Yeah,
you know?
Kind of kills you. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And there are people who would be really good about starting the project, getting things off the ground, asking the right questions, getting people pointed in the right direction. But those were the people, they couldn't stay in one place for very long. So you could start to see a pattern of, like, oh, we need to spin something up. I know who to ask. They can get the momentum, they can get it rolling. And then when we have it kind of figured out, we'll start to fill more roles in with those people who like to be in a little bit more of a stable environment. So it was more around finding the balance, but you had to observe it in action to see who kind of fit into those boxes.
Yeah, the interesting piece too is usually the entrepreneurial guys have to leave the organization to find another project, because you know, once you've started something and built it, you're less and less valuable, because if you stay in one place and you don't have other projects, you start fires, because you need to ruin something to build something, you know. And so
you gotta scratch that itch.
Yeah, did you guys figure that rhythm out for, like, entrepreneurial leaders that go, oh, okay, now you could be over here now?
Yeah, well, I don't know if they ever figured it out. I don't think it was nailed down by the time that I left, but the thing that was interesting to me was that before that even, so Zappos was really good about recognizing that in their people and encouraging it. They had a program called Z-Frogs, which I actually was able to do. That's how I got on the social media team. And the idea was, it was almost like Shark Tank before Shark Tank. And so they would have all of the C-suite would come together, and they would get in a room once a quarter, and you could come up with an idea and pitch it. And it could become something that the company decided to do, or maybe you got chosen to do, you got funding, like, okay, test this out, and this will become your job for the next however long. So they already kind of had a form of that. What was interesting is it became harder when everyone could do it because there was less governing of budget to control it. And so in Z-Frogs, it was very focused. It was, we have this amount of money, everyone's pitching for access to some of that. Whereas now, if everyone in the organization is kind of building it as we go and being able to throw these ideas out and test them, it became really hard to discern what are core practices and what are these kind of experimental things, and how much budget do we allocate to these experimental things. So I think you saw a kind of explosion of it that we didn't expect, but also weren't prepared for from a financial standpoint.
Mm-hmm. That brings you back to vision and culture, I'm guessing. And when Simon Sinek talks about your why, right? You have to be very clear about that to be able to move in a specific direction, to be able to discern what to do and what not to do. I want to move a little bit forward in the future. You are now an entrepreneur again, right? And so you're starting a new company called Octopy. Will you tell us what you're doing there?
Yeah.
Hey, before we get back to the rest of the interview, I want to take a short break to tell you a little bit about something that I am doing with a team of mine, and that is called King City. King City is a new all-digital church that is about helping you develop fulfillment in your life, because actually we believe that if you don't have a relationship with Jesus, that no matter the amount of success you have, it's all futile in the end anyways. And we believe in defeating futility. But here's the deal. Because it's digital, we're not going to have a building. We're not going to be looking for people to pay for the mortgage or the lights right away. But we do need people that say, you know what, I am all in for some sort of new church that is all about reaching people for Jesus and helping people develop fulfillment and reach their potential so that they can change the world. What does that mean? That means you need to text me and we need to get on a Zoom call together. So let's do that, all right? The number is 480-531-9015. I would love to meet you. Now, enough of me talking. Let's get back to the interview.
So it's very similar. It's basically taking all the things that I've learned and been inspired by and trying to apply it to a broader context. So you mentioned Simon's work, and that was really inspirational for me. And it gave me a ton of clarity on what really is important when you start working. And I didn't recognize that. I spent a lot of my time in my 20s and even in early 30s, I would say, working on things that seemed fun, seemed like it would get me ahead, but at the end of the day, didn't seem that fulfilling. And one of the things that I really took away from Zappos is that you attract great people. Like some of the people that I met, my coworkers, are actually some of the best friends I still have to this day. And you don't have that at a lot of jobs. Maybe you have one or two, but for me, most of my friend group are people that I met on the job and worked with. And it wasn't just because I'm the guy who loves hanging around the walls of work, but it was because they made an environment that attracted people who felt the same way I did, looked at the world the same way I did, and wanted the same things. And so I think that's where purpose comes into play. And for me, after experiencing that and then leaving and then working with organizations that were maybe struggling, because that's a lot of what I do when I work with Simon's team. You know, I'll do keynote speeches at conferences, but mostly I run workshops for teams and organizations who are trying to either get some clarity, work on their culture, find better ways of working. And what I continued to see is organizations looking at people as assets rather than recognizing they are the heartbeat of the organization. Because any organization, you take away the buildings and the tools, and it's just a bunch of people. And we seem to forget that a lot of times. And so my thought, especially that when it led to Octopy, was could we make it so that companies made better people? because we spend so much time and energy. I mean, you and I have talked about this. You spend so much time and energy at work that it doesn't just stay there. We've all had those times when you've had a rough day at work. It's not like, okay, I'm home, I'm perfectly fine, I'm in a great mood now.
Right.
You know, it's you bring it home, you take it out on family and friends, and it carries over, and there's an emotional toll that this takes in our lives. And so what if it gave us energy rather than taking it away? And it doesn't mean that every day is going to be fun, that you're going to love every minute of work, but that you're going to feel satisfied and fulfilled by that thing that you do. And work can be integrated through your life. One of the things that always kind of bugged me was this idea of work-life balance. I like the spirit of it, but it implies that they are diametrically opposed, right?
Yeah, I mean, trying to be balanced kicks my ass, man. I just, it is not good. Babe, you're not, I tell my wife all the time, you're probably not going to get quantity time. I will give you quality time.
I like that.
Yeah.
You don't usually hear the quantity piece in there, so that's good.
Yeah.
I like that. But yeah, that's exactly what I mean, right? Is we think that life has to be lived outside of work. And if you love what you do and you're doing something that is meaningful to you, why shouldn't you get some satisfaction and enjoyment from the work that you do? And so that became the kind of impetus of starting Octopy, was this idea of, can we help organizations shift the way they even approach work? Because most organizations come from that mindset we talked about earlier of it's almost adversarial between the organization and the employee, right? You sign all kinds of documents and NDAs and things that are going to say are non-compete so that you can't use anything against us. Well, that's with the assumption, like, what are you doing to ruin these people's lives to the point where you're so scared they're going to try and turn around and hurt you? And so there was these it occurred to me, and part of it's because of my bias from my experience, but it occurred to me that when I was working with these organizations, doing keynotes, doing workshops, like, it could be really inspiring. And sure, some people probably took that forward. But I've been to enough conferences in my life, and I've been to enough workshops in my life to recognize that usually 2 weeks after someone comes in and does a session for you, you don't remember what they were talking about. Like, maybe the idea behind it, but none of like the specifics, right? Or maybe they told a really great story. That's all that you remember.
Yeah.
And for me, I wanted this combination of getting people excited. I didn't like the idea of just straight up consulting, because it creates dependency, right? I need to embed, and you need to pay me so I can fix your problems. Like, no, I want you to fix your problems, and I'm going to teach you how to do it. So that to me didn't work. But I took the experience that I had in product management and kind of thought to myself, well, if we really want to change behavior, I saw people doing that on websites every single day. UX does this every single day, right? The way that Amazon is designed, the way that their app is designed, is a very specific way, because they know how to engineer behavior, and software is a great way of doing that, whether we know it or not.
Yes.
And so the idea was, if we want to sustain and scale change and make it last and actually change behavior, we have to change the tools and systems that we're using too. And so that became kind of the second piece of Octopy that we're trying to build now, which is, so we get you excited about the change, but also we're going to give you the software tools that allow you to, even if you're not trying, like, you'll get the functionality you wanted, that get the candy, but also take your medicine along with it, even if you don't know.
Yeah.
And so it gets you to be more human focused.
Yeah, that's really good. Good.
Thanks. Yeah. And then there's one future piece that I'm really excited and hopeful for, which is when we get back to having physical space together, creating those kind of physical spaces that are centered more around community. I did a year abroad, and during that year, I spent a lot of time in co-working spaces. I love the energy at co-working spaces.
Yeah, I do too.
And there's so much opportunity there, right? Because you meet so many interesting people. There's a ton of ideas. Everyone who you seem to run into at a co-working space is so excited about the work that they're doing, and it gets you excited.
Yeah.
And coming from a small town, I mean, you and I lived in the same town. You know how small it is here, and it's not tiny by any means. It's about 100,000, give or take.
Right.
So it's not a tiny, tiny town, but at the same time, it doesn't have the amenities that a big city like in LA or New York or even Denver has. And so the access and ability to go to a WeWork or a co-working space just isn't there for a lot of people in a similar situation.
Right.
And so the idea was, what if we created these spaces that are physical communities, but also made it so that they were designed for traditional organizations to take risks? So rather than being directly for the entrepreneurs, the startups, the solopreneurs, sure, they can work there too, but we actually help partner with big organizations in those cities, like the biggest employers in town, and we are a benefit onto their package as a flex work option.
There we go.
So,
yeah.
however many days a week. And we've all experienced probably over the past year, work from home, a lot of companies were super resistant to it because of that lack of trust. Right.
Yeah.
And so what if, they could feel confident that you're going to be at a space, they can see who's going and who's using the space, when they're there, how long they're there. They know there's strong internet connection. They know there's going to be quiet spaces with call booths, like all the stuff you need, coffee shop on site. How much more confident would organizations be to taking that small step instead of the big leap in trusting their employees? And once they open that door, how could we then use that as an opportunity to help them even trust you more, right? We start to give you classes. You can teach maybe some of your own classes. We start to create community amongst the people who are there across different organizations. And suddenly, you're delivering amazing work. You're getting new ideas. Oh, and by the way, you're also feeling more whole and human as you're going through your life. So those are kind of the three buckets that we're trying to do with Octopy, but we're starting right now working solely on kind of how do we get a more human focus when it comes to the mindset and maybe the structures that we're working in right now. So that's the big focus.
Yeah, that's really amazing. So you've really taken this vision for helping organizations build culture, but culture is a pretty big buzzword these days. So would you drill down for us what culture really is at its essence?
Oh, yeah, that's a hornet's nest. For me, when I think about a company culture, it really is at its core how you show up for each other behind the scenes. It has nothing to do with the perks or the benefits. A lot of people think culture has a lot to do with the nap pods or the foosball table in the break room or whatever it is. And we've all discovered, as we don't have access to those things, how little those really change the people behind the scenes. And so for me, it's about having clarity of your values and not only knowing what those mean, but knowing what they mean in practice and embodying those across the board. And so a strong company culture is an intentional one to me. I've worked with a lot of startups who they like the idea of having a strong company culture, but they don't put any effort into it. They're like, fun is our company culture.
Right.
Well, fun is an output. It is not an input, right? And so, for me, it's about clarifying not just like what do we stand for. And I think that values are a bit misinterpreted, well, not necessarily even misinterpreted. I think they need a reevaluation when it comes to organizations, because in the past, values have been, here are the core ethics of the organization. We'll talk about integrity, trust, honesty, customer-centric, whatever those kind of general principles are, which can be great. But also, if you leave them as principles, what ends up happening is they're open to interpretation as to what that actually looks like in practice. And for me, what a value should do is be reflective of who the people are behind the scenes at their very best and encourage them to be that way every single day. And so if you have these principles, turning them into actions to say, cool, integrity here looks like following through on your word. Some other places it might be, never tell a lie, whatever, right? There's different interpretations. But here, when we say integrity, it means that if you say you're going to do something, you actually follow through with it. That we can hold each other accountable for. That I know what it looks like, what it feels like, what it sounds like. And I can start to measure if that actually is important to my employees or not. And so it's observable behavior behind the scenes. And so for me, culture is understanding not only what are the values that we have, but what do these principles look like when it plays out? And do we hold each other accountable to show up that way? One of the best kind of comparisons I've heard, or one of the best kind of phrases from my friend Peter Docker was this difference between doing and being. And doing is a lot of what's in the business. We work in the business a lot. All of our performance metrics are typically around doing. But being is the culture piece, and how are you showing up along the way? And that, I think, you need to have clarity of to have a consistent culture across the board. You have to actually be explicit as to what that is, and not just kind of clumsily end up with, oh, people show up in this way, and we just ended up attracting these type of people because some of those type of people were already here, right? If you want to be intentional about building a culture, you have to know what you stand for and who you want to be at your best, and then stick to those things even when it's inconvenient.
Right. So you have a bunch of leaders that are leading an organization through startups, but you also have those leaders probably the overwhelming majority of those leaders are actually in middle management in a company, or they are in an organization that they're not the lead chair on. How do they build culture when they're not the leader?
Yeah, it's always easier. It's the difference between evolution and revolution, right? Evolution is top down, much easier way to change. Revolution, typically a little bit more violent if you're thinking about it in the social sense, but also when it comes to organizations, right? It can cause some friction. Revolution can happen also in a very slow, peaceful kind of way. And the idea is first starting with questions, I would say, because you have to come from a place of curiosity. I think, and I'm speaking from personal experience, and I can't speak for everyone, but I know when I came into the organization, I had preconceived notions about what was right, what was wrong, what we should do versus what we shouldn't do. And so I would lead oftentimes with opinions. What I found was better about creating change, or more effective at creating change, was if I led with a question and came from a place of curiosity. Rather than saying we shouldn't do this, I would ask, what were the things that led us down this path so that we're doing this thing? Because I might be missing out on some stuff, right? And so when people heard me coming from a place of curiosity, suddenly the walls came down and they were open to having a conversation about it. And it was more likely that I could have an impact, even if I didn't have the authority over the other person in the room. And so for me, it was coming from a place of curiosity starts to create that change. Being intentional with the questions that you're asking. So don't just, ask about everything, but know why you're asking it. You don't have to ask leading questions of like, shouldn't we do something like, that has an implied correct answer. Not talking about those kind of leading questions, but I'm talking about genuine curiosity with the intention in mind of trying to get clear on X. And when you start to open up those conversations, you create the space where someone who may have had their mind made up some way in a position of authority can go, you know what? I haven't thought about this in a while, or no one's really asked me that. I don't even know what the answer is. And so it plants the seeds for the opportunity to change. So for me, that's number one, is coming from a place of curiosity. And number two is, and it's not counterintuitive, it's tough. But number two is the ability to stand up for what you feel is right for the right reasons. So a lot of times, and this goes back to that example I used of myself earlier, I would stand up against a bad idea because it was my opinion it was a bad idea. But a much more effective approach of times when I should stand up is when I see someone being taken advantage of, when I see us acting out of our character as an organization, when I see someone who professes that we have these values not doing that, or if we're as an organization making decisions that say our purpose, like here's our why, here are our values, and I say, well, we're talking about opening this new line of business, and sure, we could make a lot of money doing that, but is that representative of what we're trying to build up here, that purpose? And if you're asking those kinds of questions and making sure that when you raise those challenges, you can point to the framework and say, this isn't just me, like I just want to make sure we're being who we say we are, and this is why. I think those two tools of coming from curiosity and standing up for what's right, knowing that it's, you can lean to the framework of why and values, those things will really help you lead in place. And I guess the last thing is just making sure people know you have their back. That draws people to you. In fact, I did a keynote this morning with a group, and we talk about leadership a lot. Growing up, like when we went to high school together, we had Key Club, we had DECA, we had FBLA, and all of these clubs and organizations all come back to creating leaders of tomorrow. And I worked with Key Club. I actually went and did a volunteer gig for them. I think it was the Northwest Division last year, or maybe even before that. And the thing that I started off that talk with was like, we talk about leading people without knowing where we're trying to take them. And that's such a selfish pursuit, right? To say you should want to be a leader is about you. It's just about, to say I want to lead people without knowing where you want to lead them is the same thing as saying I want followers. Well, if you want that, just go start a TikTok or an Instagram account and do your thing there. That's not leadership, right? Leadership implies you have a destination and people want to follow you there. And so for me, knowing that, knowing where you want to go, having that clear destination, being intentional with the questions and things like that, is very much aligned. And then showing up in a way that invites people to want to be around you. And it's not about like trying to appeal so that everybody likes you, but if I am more attracted in my life to people who will be honest with me in a loving way, give me the feedback, right? Even if I don't want to hear it, being able to pull me aside and say, hey, in that meeting, the way you showed up, I think you might have offended so-and-so, or, you know, and giving me those kinds of pieces of feedback. Genuine honesty and coming from a place of care, not because I'm trying to make you wrong about it, but because I want to see you succeed and I'm afraid you're getting in your own way. Very different approaches to maybe the same conversation. And so if you show up in a way that lets people know, I have your back, even if it's inconvenient, I've got your back, then I think you start to attract people and start to be able to change minds. When you're not in a position of authority, people will still want to bend over backwards to help you out and make the change you want to see.
Yeah, that's amazing. As we are getting ready to like transition into a close, one of the things that I care about our listeners doing with their lives is creating impact in their cities, but also creating and developing individual fulfillment. So if you looked at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it'd be that self-realization piece, right? How can we, as leaders in organizations, help create that and help other people develop that in their own lives?
The word legacy comes up for me a lot when I think about this, and asking yourself, you know, one of the most powerful questions you can ask yourself is, what would I want to be on my tombstone? It's a bit morbid, but like, what would you want to be remembered as? I remember part of the thing that got me on the path to where I am today. I took an intro to philosophy class my freshman year of college, and I fell in love. And one of the things that struck me as I was sitting there was we were reading, I think, Plato, and I just went, it's crazy how we remember Plato, but we have no idea who the second or third richest person in Greece was at that time, right? Yet we live our lives as if that's the end game now. And it's all about the impact. How can you actually change people's minds? And for me, it was about how do we change the way people relate to each other? That's the big way I think is left to make our impact and leave our dent in the universe. And so asking yourself on terms of, on a human level, what's the impact that you want to make? So beyond the selfish stuff of, okay, you know, by 30, I want to be making this much money. I want to have this kind of house. I want to, you know, and those are things that are fine to have as goals. But if you're going to make those goals, make impact goals as well. By 30, I also want to have taught X many people. I want to have dug this many wells for people, like whatever it looks like for you. We're not good at making those kinds of goals. So I would say make impact goals and really try and understand what's going to bring that sense of fulfillment out of you. The work that I've done with Simon and his team has given me a lot of insight into how you can articulate that. And so a book that I would recommend if you're interested, both at a personal level or as an organization, on identifying and clarifying your purpose statement or your why, there is a book called Find Your Why, where they outline the process. I'll give you a kind of a high level of how it works. But I love, even if you don't go through this process, what I love is the framework of the output. And so as an individual or as an organization, you can have a why statement. You can call it a statement of purpose, whatever it is, right? And that why statement has two pieces to it, contribution and impact. And you think about it as cause and effect. When I'm at my natural best, what's the thing that I do and the difference that it ultimately makes? And if you can articulate those two things connected to each other and use not wishful thinking, but actual historical data of your life to inform that. So in the workshops from Find Your Why, it's about telling stories, right? Meaningful, impactful moments in your life. You don't have to know why they were impactful, but if you can tell those stories and have someone listen to them and ask questions and take notes, you start to see patterns emerge and you go, oh crap, I really care about this outcome. Oh crap, I really love to do this thing for people, or I love when people do this thing for me. And so thinking about it in terms of contribution and impact, I think can be really powerful. And it's the same thing with organizations. We think about things oftentimes as mission statements. Mission and vision statements are such a mixed bag, right? Because with vision, it's sometimes it's a very clear picture, but sometimes it's a super uninspiring vision.
Right. Dunder
To be the
Mifflin.
number one, yeah. To be the number one retailer in the Pacific Northwest for X, like no one gets excited about that. And so if you keep these things, strip the product, strip the service out of it, think about that impact, but think about it at our natural best. Like this organization, if we do this right, what's the thing we do really well? And not, like I said, if it's selling clothing, maybe it's helping people realize their, the hidden gem underneath. I don't know, but like thinking about it, that next level up, take the what's out of there, and look at contribution and impact as those two pieces that can really start to give you clarity, because it's almost like the impact gives you the finish line you're running towards, but also the contribution gives you the clarity of the racing lanes on how to get there, right?
Yeah.
Anyone can help create this impact. We don't exclusively own it, but I'll tell you, to get there, we use this specific contribution, and we're really good at that thing.
Right.
And that will help you create some of those meaningful kind of measurements as well in your life of, how will I know if I'm getting there? Well, if you have it in terms of contribution and impact, you can start to say, I'll know I'm getting there because I can see that I am making this impact in this way.
Right.
So I would encourage you to think about it in those terms.
I appreciate that, because that's one of the things I found with working with Gen Z is it's become harder and harder to, I guess, growing up for us, it was like, hey, find out what you want to do with the rest of your life. This one gives a little bit better handles on, you may not know what you're going to do when you're 60, but you can know why you're doing what you're doing now. And that can help become a compass. And I really appreciate that. One of the things that you said earlier was about everything at the end of the day is not about the organization or the hierarchy or the structure. It's about people. And that really resonated. I tell my team all the time, legacy is measured in impact, and people measure legacy. And so it's always about the people you're leaving behind. And so you hit the nail right on the head. So, hey, Matt, where do we find you online? Where would you like us to go?
I mean, LinkedIn's always good. I'm there. I'm on Instagram. And the Octopy website's got all of my info as well. Really complicated email, matt@octopy.io. You can always reach me there, but yeah, LinkedIn is great. Cause I'm pretty good about checking that and staying up to date on that. I'm slow with messages, but I do get to all of them. So if you connect with me on there, I'll message you back.
Yeah. We'll put all that stuff in the show notes. We'll put all the books that we talked about. Matt, thank you very much for being a part of this.
Oh, thanks for having me. I love geeking out about this stuff.
Yeah,
That's
man.
why I wore my glasses today.
Right. I was going to do the same thing, but I had too much glare, so it is what it is. So
that's fair. Well, I appreciate it, brother, and thanks for having me. This was great.
Yeah, man. Wow. Thanks, Matt. That was an amazing interview, wasn't it, guys? Hey, every week we'll bring you one of two segments, the Soapbox or Hot Reads. Now, the Soapbox is a moment where I dive into a major point our guest made and I unpack it. And Hot Reads is where I review a book and give you my thoughts on it. I recommend the reading and I tell you why. And here's the deal. I promise to make it better than a school book report. This week, I want to start us off with our first Soapbox. I just loved what Matt had to say about culture creating. What stood out to me was that the organization should stop seeing their people as assets and begin to see them as the heartbeat of the organization. Now, when I was first leading, I was guilty of this very sentiment. I would drive my team, ignore the celebratory moments, and then harp on the places where they needed to improve. It wasn't until my coach came and saw it firsthand and then pulled me aside and said, dude, I would never work for you. Your team is human and you have seemed to forgot that. Now, here's the deal. The truth is I didn't even think about it. I cared so much about excellence and performance, not compassion and empathy. It all comes down to this, okay? People are the pulse of your purpose.
And when we lose sight of their humanity and worth in pursuit of our success or our own winning and our own wealth or you name it, we lose our right to lead in the long run. Jesus, who I consider the greatest leader that ever walked this planet, also understood this. To him, it was all about the people. And he got mad at the religious and political leaders of his day because they would see people as a means to an end and not the end itself. So here's the deal. Jesus let us know that this type of leadership produces futility. And it produces futility in us and in others. Because the byproduct of this is strife, hate, dysfunction, and bitterness. He taught his leaders not to use their authority to overpower their people. And he went one step further. When we lead our people in this way, we are like the leaders whom he called out. And he called them sons of hell. What's worse is that you yourself will begin to feel empty and depleted when you lead this way. So I want to give you 3 tips on how to begin leading people as if they are really the pulse of your purpose. Number 1 is celebrate the highs. When you have a moment of excellence, a moment of high production, when you guys have scaled a summit and you guys have won, take time to celebrate the wins. This was not easy for me and not something that came natural. I felt like I didn't need to celebrate, yet I actually did. And so when I gave our team the moment to celebrate, I actually was able to take some moment to reflect as a leader myself. What went right, not so much what went wrong. And I took some time to enjoy the moment because you don't always get moments like that. Number 2, lead with questions, not commands. Another one that I sucked at. Oftentimes when I am in the hard charging mindset, I forget that I try my best to bring the best people around in the circle and in the organization. And so I end up thinking I have to have all the answers. And so I just start telling people what to do. That's what an Enneagram 8 does, right? And so what I've learned is if I want the best people in my organization, I need to lead with questions and not commands. Because those people are smart and usually smarter than me in the area that I've recruited them to. And if I will begin to ask questions and learn from them and seek to understand, not to win the argument, I begin to realize that there are better ways to do it than what I had thought previously. Number 3, show your vulnerability. Another one that us Enneagram 8s really are horrible at. But I've learned over the years that if I can show where I'm weak, where I can show where I'm vulnerable, where I can admit my mistakes, where I can open up to my team, even if I'm afraid they'll stab me in the back, and they don't because they're good people. But even if I have that fear, if I will open up to them, they'll act more like a team than ever before, and they will perform at a higher level because they really are the pulse of your purpose. They really are, and they want to be. Each and every one of us wants a culture of high-performing leaders, and they want a culture that people love to work for, and it starts at the top with leaders. And sorry, leaders, most of us don't show enough vulnerability. So do those 3 things, and you will begin to create a culture that shows that people are the pulse of your purpose. Hey, remember to subscribe to us. And if you're watching on YouTube or if you're listening, please subscribe to our podcast on iTunes or wherever you're listening. And don't forget to rate and review us. Remember that it is up to you to develop fulfillment because there's a world out there that needs you, and fulfilled leaders fill the world with hope. Hey, I love that conversation with Matt. He had a lot of great wisdom for those of us that are in the business field, but if you lead and you lead a team of any kind, you can grab some wisdom from what he said about culture building. Hey, he is building a business, so we want to help him out. So if you're in the market for some sort of consulting or coaching or figuring out how to build culture within your organization, check him out at octopi.io. Again, that's octopi.io. Hey, thank you for listening to our interview today. We're so excited to be able to bring these to you weekly. If you'd like to stay up to date on our blogs, on our podcasts, even some of our social media, or if you would like to say hi to me, you can reach out to us at 480-531-9015. Again, that's 480-531-9015. We know that when leaders develop fulfillment in their own lives, that they begin to develop fulfillment in others. And when fulfilled leaders lead, they lead and develop hope. And the world needs a lot more hope. So here's the deal. We would love to see you next week, and let's lead full together.